You are listening to the weekly podcast from Legacy Christian Church. Changed lives, changing the world. For more information, please visit us on the web at www.lvlegacy.org.
Morning to you again. Listen, if you've been coming here the past few weeks, or you've seen our website or Facebook page, you've seen this theme. It's not on there today, but it's Mission is Possible. Okay? And the idea behind that is that with Jesus, God in the flesh, all things are possible. And I mean all things. Okay? And the question we have to constantly ask ourselves, I think, if it's not sealed in our hearts already, is do we truly believe that? Do we truly believe that? And if we're all honest, then you and I have to ask ourselves the question over and over, if we don't believe it, why haven't we believed it yet? Can I trust God? That's a tough question, isn't it? Can I trust God? So today we have a sub-theme to this Mission Possible, and it's bent. See, if we do trust God and believe He can do all things, and all things are possible, right? Then we can trust Him to take us as we are, all bent and broken and messed up, jacked up, as I say, right? With our illness, our brokenness, our death, or whatever, and defeat it. Jesus says He can beat it, right? Because no matter how good your upbringing or life, we're all bent and broken to some degree, aren't we? If we're going to admit it, okay? I know that in my life experience, it's shown me that we can't do this life on our own effectively without the power of the living Jesus to help us through these storms and trials like we talked about last week and the things of life. But if you're someone in the seats today and you're skeptical about this Jesus and about Him, our prayer is today that your mind is at least opened up to the possibility that Jesus can change that and make it different. And that's what we're here for, right? Last week we had a bit of fun talking about trusting God and how fear kind of erodes. In fact, it destroys our faith and our trust in God, doesn't it? Fear is a 4-letter word that tears down 2 5-letter words, faith and trust. So, if you weren't here, you can go to the website or to iTunes and check out the podcast. Today we travel, though, into chapter 5. And we're going to do a whole chapter in one day. Okay? The book of Mark. And in my humble opinion, it's one of the most beautiful and succinct chapters in the Bible on the power and authority of Jesus on display as it reveals the hope and the healing and the restorative power that God has and Jesus has. And it happens in 3 different scenarios in one chapter, which is just kind of, for me, has really been cool. And the more I read it and reread it over the past week, my heart just kind of became enamored and rejuvenated to a large degree by the expectation of the fact that God just loves us so much, I mean, He just loves us. And He's just waiting to do His thing in our lives if only we trust and expect Him to do these wild and crazy and miraculous things. We have to trust, don't we? So we're not going to read this chapter in its entirety, but I strongly suggest you do if you haven't done so already. I'm going to storytell much of it and then highlight certain key areas that I think are key to the conversation today. Sound good? Okay, I'm interactive, so if you're new here, shout out when I say shout out, okay? All right, so Jesus was on the Sea of Galilee, right? We ended the story last week with Him kind of on the Sea of Galilee. He's getting in the boat. He's leaving the region of His hometown, Cana and Capernaum, and they sail about 15 plus miles or so to the other side, which I think is funny, right? Because it's like 15 miles. That's a lake, isn't it? But they call it the Sea of Galilee. It's just, I don't know, it's kind of weird to me. So they get to the other side, and they pull into this region called the region of Gerensis, okay? Or Gerensis at that time. So Jesus steps out of the boat, and he's immediately greeted, so to speak, by a man who's possessed. He's possessed by an impure spirit, as it's called in the NIV Bible. Many versions say unclean, which is in essence the same thing. Impure, unclean, okay? Which I want to ask you real quick, what in your mind constitutes an impure or unclean spirit? I mean, yell some out. I'll say it back in the mic so we have it on the podcast. But what to you is an impure or unclean spirit? Demons? Unforgiveness? Anything else? Fear? Anger? Hate? Oh, it was hate. Okay. I had trouble hearing that. Anything else? Lust? Greed? Resentment? Jealousy? Those are all good ones, right? I mean, and we could go on and on, right? As far as things that bog us down, right? As I've pondered this phrase, though, impure spirit and unclean spirit, and likened it to what was described here in this scripture with respect to it possessing us, okay, it really made me think about the stuff that we hold on to, that we truly never let go of from our past, and it just grips us so tightly, and we have not yet entrusted it to God and allowed Him to remove it from us. The stuff that just chains us down and puts us in bondage, you know. So in the interest of not exposing anyone but myself, because we truly do want to promote openness and transparency, both from the stage as a staff and as a congregation, as a family, okay, in real life. So I'll use myself as an example of this today, because our stories are important, aren't they? And the things that shape us. They shape us and mold us, and if God shows up and helps to restore our story, it becomes something that He can use for His glory, despite the ugliness of it at times. And some of our stories are ugly, if we're true and honest, right? So unclean and impure spirits can come about as a result of things both done to you and by you, right? Wouldn't you agree? Okay. In my case, for instance, over the last 25 years or so, I've had to process through much of the stuff that happened to me or I did on my own, you know. And quite honestly, we're fooling ourselves if we think that the process stops too, even after you've been doing the work and the hard work of getting rid of stuff. Because every day we're tempted, right, with impurity and things that just are wrong and can lead us down the wrong path, right? So just being open and raw and transparent here, some of the things that possessed me for years that I've had to process through over the last 25 years are this. Shame and guilt. Okay? Shame and guilt. They're impure, unclean spirits, you know. I was abused by a relative at the age of 4, and then later assaulted, you know, by a 13-year-old boy when I lived in a children's home several times. And when I mean assaulted, I mean in ways that you can think of. I held that stuff close to my chest for 20 years or so, until I was reintroduced to Jesus at the age of 28. And then I started to allow Him to bring that stuff to light. My poor bride didn't know anything about that stuff. You know, I drug it into the relationship with Jesus, and I drug it into the relationship with her. You know. But when you bottle stuff like that up, it's not a good thing, is it? It eats you up, plain and simple. So another one for me was hatred. Someone yelled that out. And for me, hatred was specifically zeroed in and centered in on my real mother, because of something my dad told me at the age of 3, that she hated us and didn't want anything to do with us. Okay? So, hatred makes you do some really dumb things, doesn't it? It can possess you. It can really do some damage. And for all those years, I blamed her for abandoning me and blamed her for my being in foster homes and children's homes and the things that happened to me in those homes until the age of 12 when I got out of that children's home. And during that 20 years, until finding Jesus again, that stuff I buried and held on to, those impure spirits, that unclean stuff, you know, it led to a bunch of behaviors and, you know, acting out type stuff that added to the list of impure, unclean spirits that I was carrying along, you know what I mean? So you do things that just cling to your heart and soul and put you in bondage. So I was adding to the guilt and shame box at the same time through these behaviors, acting out in many addictive behaviors like sex and drugs and alcohol, even work obsession and other things, that just to fill the void of what I felt was a lack of love and abandonment. So if any of you have lived that lifestyle of partying and all that, you know the shameful things that go along with that kind of living. So I don't have to go into details, right? So that stuff was added on. So is this starting to sound familiar to some people in here? You've been down this road. Yeah. It's hard, isn't it? Now, even if you didn't have a background like mine, we all have stuff that's happened to us, haven't we? We've all been jacked up to some degree and bent and broken. You know I went off on a bit of a tangent there about that, but you may be wondering, what's the point? Listen, the fact is there are things in this life that possess us, don't they? They grab a hold of us. And they come in a myriad of forms, don't they? And it's my belief that a lot of our issues of the day can be metaphorically just another form of possession or bondage we experience from a dying and fallen world. A world that's constantly working to make us, something that we're not originally intended to be. Something God did not want us to be. Addiction, mental health issues, sickness, disease, poverty, and the list goes on and on and on, right? These are all things that in some way or shape have been directly correlated and affected by the original sin and the fallen state of mankind and the fallen state of the world. And these things that keep us in bondage, they rob us, don't they? They steal from us our freedom and the peace and the joy that God and Jesus so want for us. That the Bible tells us that when I call it the epic love story, what Jesus is providing is that hope and that joy and that peace. We see one form of this in the initial story where the guy, and we're going to read a little bit of it, is literally possessed by a legion of demons. But if we're honest here, I think, at least as I'm looking at this, it's really not any different to a certain degree than being possessed or in bondage to a legion of issues, right? Things that we haven't let go of. Things that have been placed in our lives as a result of others doing something to us or us doing something ourselves. As I really pondered this passage this week and prayed about it, I believe God truly wanted me to reveal this to you guys this week. It's a heavy subject. There's no doubt about it, right? But I think we need to take inventory. We need to seriously look introspectively into our hearts and our minds and prayerfully ask God to reveal to us what impure, unclean spirits are we allowing to cling to us and be attached yet, and ask Him to remove them. Trust Him. So when you walked in today, there was a 3x5 card on your seat. Okay? If you feel led during the service today, I want you to write whatever you think you can write down there about what you're holding on to, what the issue is. It can be as simple as it can be, or it can be as difficult and dirty and ugly as it can be. Okay? And what we'll do is at the end of the service, during communion, we'll do something with those cards to kind of help jumpstart the process of allowing God and Jesus to get rid of that junk for you. Okay? Kind of make it experiential. Because I don't know about you, but for me, when I started to let that stuff go, it was so liberating and freeing. And when the chains of bondage are released, life changes. It really does. But there's no pressure to do this, okay? If you want to just take the 3x5 card home and write it out and do something with it, pray over it, that's on you. But we're going to do something with it later. It'll be a beautiful thing to do. All right? Started out heavy, didn't I? All right, so let's proceed here, okay? If you don't have a Bible, go ahead and grab one. Take one of ours. If you're using your own Bible, we're going to Mark chapter 5, verses 6 through 10. If you're using our Bibles, go to page 702. Now, if you don't have a Bible of your own, take one of ours. Make it your own. Take it home. Take an extra one for your friend if you want. We give them away as a gift here. There are two more things in this first story about this demon-possessed guy that I really think are huge, okay? And the first one is, you better recognize, okay? You better recognize, and what I mean by that is, you better recognize who you're dealing with when you come to Jesus, okay? Again, I just think it's amazing that after all the miracles and the calming of the storm and just the things that He's done in His teaching, that we see, then we see these three stories, there are people still questioning who Jesus is. Like, who is this guy? You know? Even after they calmed the storm last week, it was like, who is this? Are you kidding me? Like, you better recognize, you know? So let's read this together, okay? Verses 6 through 10. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He said, "My name is Legion." He replied, "For we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. I mean, just check out the scenario, right? The legion of demons in a possessed man, okay, immediately recognizes who Jesus is and calls him out by name in verse 7. Jesus, Son of the Most High God. Now, I don't know about you, but if I heard that from someone who was demon-possessed, right, and I'm standing there, and this guy had never met Jesus before, what would you be thinking? Yep, this is the Son of God. You know, there's no doubt about it. He's the Messiah, you know. But these guys are like, you know, it's like period exclamation point right there. A demon, not only one demon, but like a legion of demons are calling him out, right? It's just funny to me. I don't know, am I being too simplistic here? I mean, it just baffles me that even to this point, the disciples still appear to be unsure. It's just kind of odd. And then the last thing from this initial story, which is I think is very important, Jesus cast out the legion of demons into a bunch of pigs, right? And they jump off the cliff into a sea and they die. And then all the folks from town come running to see what happened. But then in their fear, right, not necessarily recognizing who Jesus is, but in their fear, they tell him to leave. I don't know about you, but if some guy was hanging out with me, I'd say, "Hey, hang out, you know, let's chill for a while, you know." But no, they say, "Leave. You killed all these pigs, you know." I don't know. It's just kind of, you know, now we have pork barbecue for the rest of the week, you know. I don't know. But the most important thing I see here at the end of the story, we see happen here, is this, and it's in verses 18 through 20. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away, began to tell in all the Decapolis, which was the city he was supposed to be living in, because he was actually living in caves and out there chained and going nuts for how many years. But he goes to the Decapolis and tells them how much Jesus had done for him. And all the people were what? Amazed. Now, those of you that know me and know Legacy, why do you think this section is important to me and to us? You can yell it out. Go tell the story. Go tell the story. You know, we need to tell the story, people. When God does the miraculous in our lives, we need to ask God to help us shape and form the story for his glory and go tell folks. You know, I also want to point out, and this I think is a huge issue that I'd really like us to notice and grab a hold of, is how Jesus tells this person to tell the story. Okay? See, some folks that I've encountered over the last few years think that telling the story is one thing or the other. Meaning, some folks that think that telling of the story is just cramming Bible knowledge and memorizing things and theology into your head, you know, and then quoting it verbatim and regurgitating it. Okay? However, you see Jesus say that here? Does he say, "Hey, go tell them how they should learn the law and memorize it, and that'll be your reward for the people who will be amazed by how much you know"? No. What does Jesus tell this young man to do? He's no longer possessed. He's got a miraculous thing going on. He says, "Go tell them what the Lord has done for you." I don't see any theology, doctrine, anything included in that. Okay? Now, don't get me wrong. Okay? Please don't take me wrong. It's very important to know the Scriptures. We have to study, okay? Overall. But it's also very important to be able to apply and put them into your life and make it part of your story so you can tell it. Because just as they heard Jesus speak things and say things and do things, you know, as the living word, okay, as the Bible calls him, we also have the living word that we can read, right, every day. And for the most part, that is between prayer and that and teaching is what's going to change and transform us, right, to a certain degree, to a large degree, actually. And it changes us and transforms our hearts and changes our stinking thinking, doesn't it? Okay? And just as we see in the Scriptures, then, it's the power of the story. It's the power of the story and the changing and the healing and the miraculous that draws folks in to want to know the Scriptures, to want to know who this Jesus is, this Jesus that we find hope in, this Jesus that can heal and restore and make us new again. Does that make sense? Okay? So learn to tell the story. Mesh it with your story, your changed life story, and it'll have an impact that will what? Amaze people, right? We have to learn how to tell it. Now, moving on to the next two stories of this chapter, we again encounter Jesus, his power to heal and raise the dead. But more importantly, what we see, I think, here is total trust and faith that God can do it, that he can accomplish it. You know? Jesus is just walking along, right? And a synagogue leader, a religious leader of that day, which many of them were against Jesus. There was a lot of pressure, right? If those of you that know the story and are familiar with it, there was a lot of things going on around Jesus, and people were not digging who he was, okay? And many of them were against him and his teachings. But this guy, he falls to his feet and pleads with him, "Come to my house for my daughter is dying," right? And despite the ridicule and the pressure this leader might face, his faith and his trust in Jesus led him to publicly drop before his knees and ask Jesus for help. It took some guts, I think, given his position, you know. It really did. And not much is known about this man after this story. His name's Jairus. But you can bet his life was changed from that point on, you know. I also find it interesting that despite the pressure and politics surrounding Jesus, this young leader was somehow aware, just like those demons, who Jesus was. He understood the power, you know, and what Jesus could do. Somehow he knew. And he had the authority to do what he asked and he wanted to do. So Jesus begins to follow him to his home. Okay? He starts walking along. And as Jesus is walking to the synagogue leader's home, little does the crowd or he know there's another in the crowd that's taking a huge risk too. It's a woman who's deemed unclean by her people, is hiding in the crowd somehow. She'd been bleeding for 12 years without any hope of any medical fix. Nothing could help her. They've tried. She'd been bleeding for that long. But she knows that she knows that she knows that she can trust Jesus and has the faith to do what she's got to do to get there and just touch his garment and knows that she'll be healed. And as you read this, you know, you can almost envision this desperate yet determined woman slowly inching her way forward, you know, and somehow not being recognized by the people. I mean, it's not that big of an area, right? Not that big of a village, right? So somehow she's really being stealth about this, and then suddenly she's there, you know. She's next to the rabbi, and all she wants to do is touch the tassel of the rabbi's prayer shawl, which that's a prayer shawl on the cross there. All she wants to do is touch the tassel, and she'll be healed. So she reaches, and she finally touches, and suddenly Jesus just stops. Just stops. Says, "Who touched me?" Like, who touched me? There's hundreds of people around him. They're bumping into him like there's this large crowd. And I think it's funny, the next line is comical because the disciples are like, "Jesus, really? Who touched you?" You know, like, are you losing it, you know? And he's like, "No, someone touched me." He knew because he felt the power being released to this woman to heal her. So he insisted and stopped and looked around. Like, could you imagine the fear in this poor woman? Because now she knows she's going to be found out. And in that situation, she could have been hurt badly, maybe even stoned, put to death for being somewhere she's not supposed to be. It's just kind of a really awesome scene, I think. So what does she do? Her reaction is the same. Let's read this together. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your what? Your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." What healed her? Her faith. And don't you just love how Jesus sends her off? Go in peace and be free from your suffering. Go in peace and be free from your suffering. The question I keep asking myself, and I've been asking everybody the last few weeks, even in these sermons, is, do you believe this? Do you believe this? I mean, do you believe that faith, a deep abiding trust in God, will lead to your healing and to your restoration? Do you truly believe that? Do you truly believe that you can be in peace and free from your suffering? These are questions I think we really need to ask ourselves, Because if we believe the Scriptures and we believe in Jesus, it's obvious from me, from Jesus' statements, how important this truly is. To have a faith that doesn't let go and a trust in Him that doesn't let go. A deep, abiding faith and trust. I think Jesus explains this even further as we return back to the story of Jairus, because that story's not over yet, is it? Okay? All right, so he's standing there, and he's talking to this woman and to the people, and all of a sudden, Jairus' friends and family come running up and let him know and inform him that his daughter's died. Okay? And they even say, don't bother the rabbi anymore. But somehow, in the midst of this, Jesus hears this discussion. I'm thinking probably because in that culture, it's the norm to openly grieve when you hear news like that. So they probably started wailing and, that kind of thing, okay? So Jesus probably understood immediately what was going on. And his response is this. Overhearing what they said, Jesus told them what? Don't be afraid, just believe. Don't be afraid, just believe. See the theme again. Don't be afraid, the first thing, and just believe. In other words, have what? Faith. Faith. Then Jesus goes and does what Jesus does. He raises the dead to life. The child had actually died. And just to prove once again we could trust and have faith in Him, He does that. I mentioned at the start of this discussion that once I began to really let this chapter sink in this week, it really, just floored me, enamored me, rejuvenated me, that I can trust Jesus completely, utterly, because I know that He loves us so much, and He's just waiting to do His thing in our lives. If only we truly trust. If only we truly have faith that He can do these wild and crazy and miraculous things to heal and restore us. We have to have faith. We have to trust. It's complete, total abandonment type trust. You know what I mean? So let's tie this all up quickly, shall we? Don't you think the variety of folks healed and restored in this chapter is kind of interesting? You have one that's possessed. You have one that's sick beyond medical help and reason. And one is dead. One literally dies. But I think the other interesting group of folks in the story are the observers and the folks that see what's going on, The folks scared because Jesus wielded power beyond just healing the young man, but they saw the demons lying dead in the sea. That would be just a crazy thing to see, right? Bunch of pigs jumping off a cliff into the water. Folks too stunned then to deal with an unclean woman because they witnessed the Son of Man instantly heal her on the spot just because of her faith. Folks who laughed at when Jesus said the girl was sleeping. Skeptics, right? We have skeptics all around, don't we? Even today about Jesus. Maybe some in this room. That's okay. Doubt's a good thing because it makes you ask questions. Don't you agree? And finally, a religious leader whose reputation is on the line, right? Someone who's risking it all. So why do I mention this? I mention it because I believe this chapter gives us a glimpse of the future, of what the church could be and should be like. You know? First off, are any of these folks that Jesus encounters here perfect people? No. No way. They're either very broken and very bent, just like all of us, or they think they're not, and they truly are. Okay? And the body of Christ is for everyone. The church is for everyone. And I think that Jesus gives us a glimpse of who should be in the mix, and that's everyone. Everyone. The possessed, the addicted, the mentally ill, the sick and the dying, the skeptics, the religious who need to learn from knowledge, that beyond knowledge they need to learn how to live it out. And the list goes on and on, right? Everybody in one. Now, does this mix of folks, when you have them all together, make things messy? Yeah, you betcha. People are messy. It's the bottom line, you know? Even those who think they aren't messy are messy. So, you know, and you've heard me say it many times up here, if church ain't messy, then we ain't doing it right. Okay? Because people are messed up. And that's why we have Jesus. Living in a community like this, you know, where you have all these different types of people, it requires some huge things. It requires a love beyond the law, right? It requires the sacrificing of our own rights at times. It requires a huge measure of grace and forgiveness. I mean, the type of forgiveness that is required every day from the bottom of our hearts. Every day. Okay? The type of forgiveness that many times is beyond us. It needs Jesus. Okay? I know there are people in here right now that have not been able to forgive on their own. The only way they're going to be able to do it is with and through the power of God and Jesus. Okay? The Holy Spirit enables us to forgive beyond our own ability. It's tough. But we must work on this daily in order to be and live holistically in this family and body of Christ. Don't you agree? Don't you agree? Yeah, I think it's the only way it's going to work. You know, when we talk about one love and one body and one body of Christ, it requires all those things. Because we're going to have differences. You know? And you know what, folks? If we truly try to live out this type of community with the faith and trust that Jesus expects and wants from us, then the healing and restoration and power of God will explode on the scene in such ways that as the stories are told, people will be astonished. And they will in turn be drawn to Jesus. Not legacy, Jesus. Okay? This is what Jesus meant when he left that young possessed man to tell all of Decapolis the story. Go tell the story of what I've done for you. That's what's going to draw them to God. But the real story in this entire chapter is the healing and restoration, isn't it, of people and raising the dead to life. And that's what Jesus does, folks. That's what he's in the business of doing. He heals. He restores. He raises the dead to life. See, the church is just a place to gather and talk about the story. But Jesus is the healer and the restorer. He's the centerpiece. And just like the folks in this story, we must fall to our knees and recognize who he is and the power that he has to restore and heal our broken and messed up lives. You know, on our cross, you may have noticed we have two garments. One is purple, which is basically just symbolic of Jesus' royalty, and that he's king, Savior, okay? So it's a royalty color. The other is a prayer shawl. And that's put together in the fashion of the traditional Hebrew tradition and theology. Each of the tassels has a certain number of turns. There's all kinds of intricacies that are involved in that prayer shawl. And in the Jewish culture and history of the Bible, the prayer shawl had what many believed healing powers. Okay? And so throughout, and the high priests and the rabbis of that day would wear these prayer shawls. They would wear them over their shoulders, and when they would go to pray, they would put them over their heads, and then they would spread them out, giving them almost a metaphorical look of wings of eagles. Okay? Which, if you know and are familiar with the scriptures, there's a ton of references about eagles and being protected and healed under eagles' wings. Anyway, the tassels on the edge are unique and tied with a certain number of knots, like I said, in a tradition. But it was said that God's healing power was to be found in these tassels. They're called tzitzits, Tzizits, tzitzits. Most theologians believe that this is what the bleeding woman was actually reaching out for when she reached out for Jesus, and with her faith was healed. She grabbed a tassel. So we're getting ready to go into a time of communion. But after you've taken the communion bread and wine, if you felt led during the service or even now during communion time while the music's playing to write down any of the issues on your card, okay? There are 3 nails on the cross, just like the original cross. 2 on the top and 1 at the bottom for your feet. If you want, you can come up after if you've taken your communion, nail that to the cross. Nail it to the cross. Touch one of the tzitzits then and pray. Pray that God removes and takes away these impure, unclean spirits that may be bogging you down and holding you down, keeping you in bondage. If you take this seriously and truly do it with an attitude of faith and trust, it could be a huge day for you. It could be an impactful day for you. Change your life forever. So I'm praying that happens. Praying that there are people in here right now that God instantly heals and changes.
Thanks for listening to the weekly podcast from Legacy Christian Church. Legacy meets weekly at 5925 Tillman Street, Suite 800 in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Stay tuned for the weekly update.
What is up, Legacy peeps? This is Mike, the creative arts guy here at Legacy with your weekly update. Check it out, happening next Friday night. That's right, June 14th, 6 p.m. Legacy is hooking up with Upper McCountry Township to host a movie in the park. We're showing Captain America. If you're on the events team, talk to Nicole at lvlegacy.org to find out all the details. If you haven't signed up yet to serve, she's still looking for volunteers. Connect with her. Otherwise, come hang out and enjoy a really awesome movie. Also happening the next day at Legacy, June 15th at 9 a.m., yard sale and bake sale. That's right, there's going to be a bank competition as well as some really cool stuff getting sold. We're going to raise funds to help support a One Love group that had some fire happen in their neighborhood, and we're also going to raise some funds here for Legacy. So come hang out, come peddle your wares, come get some shopping done and hang out. It'll be an awesome time. June 15th, 9 a.m., Legacy facility. Hope you're having a great day, and we'll talk to you then. Bye.